Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted to be joined once again by James French and also by Brian Degnan. The football's back. Obviously, we'll be touching on international break. Big game tomorrow. A big game in itself, but also in preparation for the Champions League. Brian, we're going to be looking through the different dilemmas that Brendan Rodgers might have with obviously new players that have come in that haven't played yet, players who have been injured, that word once again. And we'll be going into tomorrow's game with one eye on Feyenoord. You're allowed to do that when it's Champions League, aren't you, Brian? I mean, we're not underestimating Dundee.
No, it's really interesting, actually, Brendan Rodgers' comments on it. And normally they're very sort of, well, we focus on the next game, only the next game. But the way he framed it, which I quite liked, was if we don't beat Dundee, the Rangers result means nothing.
Yeah.
Which I quite like. I quite like that mentality. And initially I thought he would probably rotate the squad ahead of the Champions League game just to sort of, save some legs for Tuesday. But I'm not as convinced now. It'd be interesting to see. But like, as fans, you can't help. It's only natural to be more excited for the Champions League nights than it is for a trip to Dundee. No offence to the City of Discovery, but it's not going to get you that excited. Unfortunately, the Champions League's where it's at. So. Of course, massive important game, but you've got to have one eye on the game on Tuesday.
Yeah, you do. And the big thing for me as well, James, when you look at the changes that seem to be constant this season with regards to the amount of new bodies coming in, but also the amount of injured players, there's always that risk, I guess, with international break. That's your big worry. It has happened. We know it's happened. But we've got one game, really, after that international break to prepare ourselves for Feyenoord. So it's only natural, I guess, to use Dundee almost as that dress rehearsal, if you like. It's an audition for the big one. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but that's the way you've got to use it for the Champions League, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, to touch on what Brian was saying, like maybe normally we'd kind of expect a bit of rotation home to Dundee and then big Champions League game obviously next week. But the way Celtic season's gone so far is we haven't really had the luxury of having a consistent team selection with loads of different factors, really. Firstly, with Brendan Rodgers coming in, new manager, new ideas, he's going to want to see what his best team is, which I don't think he knows yet, which is fair because of all the players coming in. But injuries obviously haven't helped. Even if you look at Feyenoord, they've had the luxury of having a settled team for the last few weeks. We've obviously had the centre half injury crisis. Nat Phillips came in, obviously not fit enough to start last week, which was disappointing at the time. But I think Brendan will use this game against Dundee, although it's not the ideal preparation going into the Champions League. He'll use it as a bit of a precursor. I think particularly that the spine of the Celtic team, that the centre half partnership, whoever starts on Saturday, I think will start next week in Rotterdam. Because especially the likes of Nat Phillips, he hasn't. I was kind of doing a bit of research on him. He hasn't featured in one matchday squad for Liverpool, which isn't great. He's obviously been training, and he would have had the last week training in Lennoxtown, but he'll need some minutes in the legs Saturday going into next week, which I think is the best option probably to start Nat with his Champions League experience, Liverpool experience, and what's a relatively inexperienced star centre-back shop at the moment with Scales and Lagerbielke. But yeah, I think Rodgers will definitely use Saturday as a precursor to Feyenoord.
I think you've got to. I spoke to the Feyenoord troops during the week there because just whilst you're off, James, I'll mute your mic a wee bit. There's a tiny little bit of static, and I'll bring you back in obviously when you're chatting. But I spoke to the Feyenoord guys during the week there, Brian, and obviously on the back of that, looking at their team, looking at their performance, it's a massive challenge for Celtic. I mean, we get excited as Celtic fans, as football fans. It's only natural. You're thinking of potential results. And I said yesterday, if we come away from Rotterdam with a draw, I'll be absolutely delighted. And one of the main reasons for it is, I take what James is saying there. We don't really know what the best starting 11 is yet. It's almost like we're still tinkering with it. It seems that way in any case. But yesterday, JP and I spoke about one area of that team. We're going to go through all the different parts of that side and how it's going to be made up. And it was the central defensive area. And we spoke about, obviously, the performance of Liam Scales against Rangers and our belief that if you've got the jersey, you've earned it, and it's yours to lose. He's not obviously had a bad game since then because we've not played. It would seem unfair. It would seem a bit ruthless, but I can see him getting dropped. And there was a suggestion yesterday in the comments section that perhaps he's going to move over to the left and you drop Greg Taylor. So the central defensive area, let's start with that, Brian. Let's have your thoughts on, does Nat Phillips come straight in? You know, basing that on the fact that he hasn't played competitively. Does he come straight in? If he does, who does he partner?
So I think, you know, on the subject of the teams and rotation stuff like that, even if we had like a settled 11 that's our best 11, I still think it might change for Rotterdam because I think Rodgers has learned to be a bit more pragmatic in Europe. So I suspect the way we set up against Dundee will be far more attacking than against Feyenoord.
Yeah.
So I suspect the midfield will change anyway. And I also think that Nat Phillips will start against Feyenoord because one of the things that your man from the Anfield Rap is saying is that he really likes defending when he's under pressure. He really likes when he has to just defend.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the best version of him. So I think he starts against Dundee to make sure he can get through the game and he's fit and he's got some time in his legs. And then I think he'll soak up that pressure. Scales, I think, in an ideal circumstance, you would say, well, no, play him against Dundee because it's his jersey to keep. I kind of agree with that mantra, but I don't think you can go into a Champions League game with him at centre back. I just don't, especially when you've got Nat Phillips in for that reason. I just think it doesn't suit, and Phillips needs the time against Dundee to be ready for Feyenoord. So I don't think you can afford to give Scales the jersey tomorrow either. Really, I know it sounds harsh on him. To be fair, he had a really good game against Rangers. I still don't think he's the answer. So I would probably drop him if somebody was fitter anyway. But certainly, I think that's the reasons he won't play. Is because I think you need Nat Phillips at the centre back because we're going to be under pressure against Feyenoord. So I know they were considered the sort of weakest pot one team, and you probably say they are, but they're still a very, very, very good one. And it's going to be a difficult game. So we need as many sort of experienced defenders that we can muster, and Nat Phillips is
that man. I'm going to throw this to James because you defended Liam Scales, and rightly so, when you were on last week. And I asked JP the question yesterday, would it be a ruthless move by Brendan Rodgers to drop him now? Because, you know, I think about things like the confidence of the individual player, the partnership, albeit over 2 games that he was starting to build with Lagerbielke. And then you're starting again. So how many central defensive partnerships have we had this season? This would be like the 4th already, isn't it? We've had Norowski and Lagerbielke, Lagerbielke and Scales, and Norowski and Carter Vickers. This would be the 4th new partnership. So there's so many different things you need to consider with this one, James. What's your thoughts on Scales? What does it do to him if he does drop out tomorrow? Do you drop him out tomorrow? I mean, what's your thoughts on the central defensive partnership?
Yeah, listen, just touching on the Mike Norowski and Carter, because I think if we had that starting pair going into final next week, I'd be pretty confident. Especially Feyenoord. I think Jimenez is missing, Ueda, Japanese striker who they signed in the summer. Their 2 striking options are injured, so they don't have an actual striker going in. But yeah, I would have been relatively confident with Carter Vickers and Norowski, but obviously injuries happen, and I think now we're left Scales, Phillips, and Lagerbielke. I think starting Phillips Saturday as a precursor to next week is the sensible option. It's the option Rodgers will take. Who will accompany him? I think it's up for debate. I think Scales obviously hasn't. I don't think he's played. I think throwing him into the deep end in the Champions League is probably harsh on him. I think Rangers away, obviously a huge game, but he played there with Aberdeen last year. He had a full season in Scotland. He's well accustomed to the climate and stuff now.
Yeah.
But I think Lagerbielke, Scales probably outshone him at Ibrox, which was surprising to me. I think I said it last week as well. But Lagerbielke, the one thing that he does have to his game is the ability just to them long range passes into the final third, and especially his diagonal passing is really, really impressive. Like next week against Feyenoord, we're going to be under serious pressure in terms of their press. Arne Slot and Feyenoord, they're a really high pressing team. Rangers obviously tried to press us, done it pretty badly. We played out with our press really, really easily. So I think Lagerbilt's ability just to play them diagonal passes out to the wings and stuff will be really useful against Feyenoord. So even though I love Liam now and he's Irish, so I kind of have to back him, but I think personally I probably would say Lagerbilt over Scales for Saturday. I just think Scales, he probably hasn't played at that. I don't think Lagerbilt has either, but I just probably just feel Lagerbilt has that ceiling that he can go to. Maybe I suppose I've seen people saying Lagerbilt lacks a bit of pace, but I think he seems pretty quick over short distance, and I think he's probably a bit more agile than Scales, which would be useful against Feyenoord, who will be quick, obviously, on the counter and stuff. So yeah, I think it's Lagerbilt and Phillips for me, definitely, for Saturday.
The impression I get, obviously this is just from the outside looking in, is that if, for example, that kind of decision has to be made, Brian, and as I said yesterday, JP and I were speaking about, I think it is a prerequisite that a great manager has to have a ruthlessness about them. I've spoken about it before. I think sometimes you've got to separate yourself away from, but how's it going to make them feel? But at the same time, the manager also needs to deal with that, the fallout from dropping a player who's just had probably the highlight of his career against Ibrox. That's for me, that's the breakout performance of Liam Scales' career so far. He's 25. There's plenty to come. So you've got that suggestion that you bring in that Phillips, and it's a flip of a coin around Lagerbielke and Scales. None would surprise me, by the way. When we see that team that announced tomorrow, if it goes for Lagerbielke or Scales, none of the two would surprise me. I do think he'll put in Phillips. Then he needs to deal with Scales. But I think that Rodgers strikes me from the outside looking in, Brian, as the type of gaffer who would be able to deal with that personal side of dropping a player and making sure that it's not going to absolutely dent their confidence. Does it give you that kind of impression as well?
Yeah, I think so. What I quite like about Rodgers actually is he's quite a straight talker. You don't see him getting angry or animated in the touchline, but he can be, there is a line and he won't cross it. I remember when we see it the first time, I was very briefly associated with a radio station in Glasgow, and one of the sports people had said that Rodgers is really savage with journalists when he was first here. He says he likes to make it clear he's in charge and he'll answer the questions he wants to answer the way he wants to answer them. He says, and he'll sort of soften over the season, but he's quite cutting. And I think I remember the interview where they were asked about the guy made the joke about Griffiths Sue, and he just cut it right down. So I suspect, I think he seems someone that's very clear with the players and their roles in the squad. I expect we'd have had the conversation with Scales at the start of the season and said, look, you might not be first pick, but you're an important part of the squad. If you're happy with that, then I want to need you here.
Yeah.
But don't expect any, And I think Scales is going to know he's not first pick. If you've got a guy on loan with potentially an option to buy, who's played for Liverpool, who's played in the Bundesliga, who's played in the Champions League, he's going to start before you. That's the reality. Now, whether Scales maybe comes in for Taylor at left back tomorrow to make sure Taylor stays injury free for Tuesday, that's more interesting, and that may happen. But certainly, yeah, as we've covered with the centre backs, I think we're spot on. And an excellent point a minute ago as well about Lagerbeek's or Big Shandy's diagonals, because if you think about it, and Al Morrison made an interesting point about Home and O'Reilly and their turnover from defence to attack for the counter. So if you consider that as your midfield soaking up pressure, and then you've got probably Yang most likely, Kyogo, Maeda trying to run at pace to run into these longer balls coming into the back. That sounds like a probably a logical plan. I just don't know if Scales playing out for the back is going to be ideal for a team like Feyenoord. And I know they're a wee bit weaker because they've got injuries, but even then, what these Dutch teams are like. There was some boy at 17 that comes in, scores a hat-trick against us and goes for 50 million next season. That's a very Celtic in Europe thing to happen. So it remains to be seen. But yeah, I think Rodgers will handle it well. He asked the question. Yeah, I think he's very ruthless, but I expect he's laid out his expectations of where he sees the players in the squad very early in the season.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. And going into that transfer window as well, I'm sure the expectation would have been discussed with Liam Scales around, if you stay here beyond this transfer window, this is where you're going to be in the pecking order. Now, Double Denim, you're in on the YouTube. Welcome everybody who is tuning in on this Friday afternoon. It's the eve of the Dundee game. Hatate must come into the team for me. He provides a balance between Kalmack and O'Reilly in midfield. We've missed his mobility, passing, innovation, and direct running. I do think he is the playmaker within the midfield. He's not started a game this season. Let's remind ourselves of that as well. But we are asking the question today, how you're going to be setting up your midfield. We'll be talking about home. Even Bernardo, don't expect him to start for obvious reasons. But we'll be talking about all the different options that are available to Brendan Rodgers tomorrow. Michael the Boy, McGregor, Hatate and O'Reilly start tomorrow in preparation for the Champions League game. Personally, that would be my choice as well. We'll be talking a wee bit around as to why that would be my choice. Celtic follower, Hatate home, Bernardo, Young, Palma and Tillio are now available. But for me, only Yang starts. It'll be a tough battle for places, including Awata and Turnbull. Awata's not really been in the frame. Competition is healthy, inconsistency isn't. Yes, right. Now, we've spoken a wee bit about the centre halves. I now want to turn our attentions very briefly, not to Scotland on international duty, but to Ireland. And I want to get the thoughts of yourself, James. I was saying to you before we came live, I started having a real interest in the international side under Jack Charlton way back in 1988, that memorable Euro tournament. Ray Houghton, Ronnie Whelan, that type of player, Pat Bonner in goal, saving the penalty against Romania in the 1990 World Cup that followed. Loved that tournament, loved watching Ireland ever since. Where are you at the moment? I mean, what's the expectations with Stephen Kenny at the helm?
Well, kind of the last, obviously, I've been season ticket holder since I was 5 or 6 years of age, so I've been going to the games for years, and obviously Jack Charlton, 88, I think for 20 years or so after that, it was hoofball, really, kind of defensive enough football. Martin O'Neill, Roy Keane, obviously the Euro 2016, some great memories there. We beat Italy, went to goal up against France, eventually went out. I think people really thought we'd build on that after O'Neill, after the tournament in France, but didn't happen. Went to Mick McCarthy, obviously, and then we put Stephen Kenny in charge of 21s. With really a lot of really exciting talents in the 21s. Off the top of my head, it's Adam Ida, Troy Part, that kind of generation of players. Mm-hmm. Kenny was in charge of the 21s. He obviously got the senior job and a lot of hype around him. Kenny, for those who aren't, were obviously managing Scotland, and you were saying, John, before. But he done really well with Dundalk in the League of Ireland. Got them to the Europa League group stages. I think they drew at AZ Alkmaar away. Had a few really good results, competed well, played really good football, on a really limited budget as well. So people are kind of expecting him to come in and transfer this new generation of players. He's blooded like a huge amount of young players, which is obviously unusual for international football. It's began to stagnate probably over the last year. And we had that win against yourselves, Scotland, 3-0 at the Aviva. That was kind of the highlight. But I think it's stagnated over the last year and a half, just in terms of the results. Obviously, I think it's 4 wins in 26 games, which is just not really good enough for international football. And them 4 wins, I think, against Andorra, Luxembourg, Gibraltar, and I don't know, I think another kind of lower ranked team. But yeah, listen, the international break just gone. 2-0 loss to France, which was kind of expected. You're playing the best team in the world, and 2-1 at home to the Dutch. Really good first half, poor second half. Missing Evan Ferguson, who's kind of the shining light in Irish football at the moment. Obviously, 18 scoring hat-tricks in the Premier League, which is completely unheard of these days, it's particular for an Irish player. But a lot of talk around Kenny's future. I think FAI announced the other week or a few days ago that he will be here till the end of the campaign, and then they will probably assess it from there. But listen, I think Irish footballers, we've a real golden generation coming up, even in the 21s. Obviously, you to be aware, Rocco Vata, Boston Noir, both playing for the 21s over the last week. Rocco scored 2 against San Marino there this week. So listen, we've a lot of good prospects coming from the 21s, and yeah, hopefully it bodes well to the future, because going to the games at the moment is just kind of loss after loss. So I've adopted Scotland as my second team at this stage. So I was disappointed with the England result the other night, but
Yeah,
you're going to
definitely.
qualify anyway, which is the main thing.
No, it is, because it became the norm for many, many years when I was growing up that Scotland were always in the finals, as were Ireland. And whoever got knocked out first, you then turned your attention to whoever was left in. So normally I was watching Ireland, because Scotland never qualified beyond the initial stages of anything. But yeah, he is building a decent side. Just a wee point on Rocco Vata. I brought it up on Monday, and it leads us in nicely, actually, to the next position, I guess, on the park, because the news of Abada being injured, Brian, it was one of the roll in the eyes moment, not another one. And it's not just a knock, it's a 3 or 4 month, according to Brendan Rodgers, 3 or 4 month layoff for Lila Abada. I mean, it's devastating for the player. I don't think he got going so far this season, but we were tipping him, certainly on Acsom, to be one of these guys that Brendan Rodgers was really going to push on to the next level. I was looking forward to seeing him on the Champions League platform, Brian. That's now kiboshed, obviously, unless we are able to progress through the initial group stages. It's so disappointing for Abada, but it begs the question, and I'm not saying for a moment you throw in Rocco Vata, but he's certainly going up a place because we've lost a right winger. But the question is who starts, and we've got a lot of comments coming in and around that. We've already heard Yang's name being mentioned. I think he is probably the natural next in line. What's your thoughts on that? Because I do think we've got great cover, you know, across both sides of the park in the wing areas, and it's a case of who do you pick. I don't think Rodgers is going to do anything that's going to be a surprise. I think he'll go with Yang because he's got the most game time so far this season. You know, with the caveat that you also have Tilio coming back into training. You've got Palma, I think, starts training today after his international exertions. And then below that, you've got the likes of Jamesy Forrest. You've got Rocco Vata. Plenty of options. Who do you go for?
Yeah, it's going to have to be Yang, I think. And the logic is the same for starting Phillips. I think Yang has been brought in for the European Games. The reason I say that, because a lot of people have scoffed at the recruitment Rodgers has made, but if you look at a lot of them, you know, most of the players he's brought in have been tall, you know, quite strong, physical, and they've got very distinct qualities. We talked about Lagerbilt's diagonal passes for the back, talked about Phillips' ball winning in the air. You look at Yang's physicality, he's like really big for a winger. He's very, very fast, very strong, but he's also got a brilliant work ethic for tracking back and covering at the back. And I think that's going to be key in Europe. So I think he starts tomorrow to get the time in the legs and then get into the Euro campaign. And I think that, you know, it's going to be interesting for him. Actually, on Abada, so I'm a big fan of Abada's, as most people will know. But I have said as well that I don't think Abada and Maeda are great together on the wings because none of them are really wingers. So when they play as in part of that front three, I always think you're missing a wee bit of something.
I agree with that.
So I always thought like the combination when Jota was here, Jota and Maeda was good because Maeda's that kind of second striker and obviously his work ethic, whereas Jota's your tricky winger and can do things. Abada's similar to Maeda in the way that he's a second striker. He's certainly more clinical, but he's not as good off the ball. But I think the way to offset is to have someone more traditional in the other side. So it might be a blessing in disguise for Celtic. Obviously, don't want any of your players injured, but I think that the balance works better when you've got at least one traditional winger in the team. And I think that's going to be key. And then the other thing is as well, it's obviously brutal when you get lots of injuries. But if you're going to get those injuries, get them now, so that by the time you work towards Christmas, in sort of the latter stages of the Champions League campaign, you get players back, you start to galvanise, you can get a bit of momentum going. I'd rather have now than ever in the title run and we get those injuries and the squad's decimated. That'd be a bit more difficult. But of course, it's never good at any time to have injuries, especially when each one seems to be 2 or 3 months at a whip. I don't actually recall a time we've had as bad an injury crisis or as many players out for that length of time at the one time.
It is horrendous. And I take your point because I think what Yang's shown us is so far he's the only winger that wants to take on his man. I don't know if obviously Tillio and Palma will bring that to the stage as well, but he does jink past her player. He can change the game. He can change the dynamic of your attack by doing that. I don't see Maida doing it unless he's burning somebody for pace. A wee bit like Abada. I keep going on about his anticipation. I just think Abada's great at finding space, which can be found obviously with the kind of passing from the likes of Lagerbielke, etc. So yeah, when Jota left, that was my biggest concern. Who we got that actually takes on a man. It's something as simple as that. And I think Yang's shown that he is keen to do it. I don't expect James for Rocco Vata to get many starts this season. Unfortunately for him, because I think it's an important part of his development. However, he does go up a notch, doesn't he? And we were speaking about his international endeavours on Monday, where I said wherever he makes that step up, he continues to show up. You know, he moved into the 18s. He showed up. He's now a younger one of the players in the under-21 squad. He scores a couple of goals. I know that San Marino aren't any great shakes, but you've got to go out there and make that step up time and time again. I don't think he's let us down in the first team at Celtic. I really don't think that for a minute. I just don't think he's had enough minutes. I mean, he's not kicked a ball so far this season. So what's your view, James, on who replaces Abada? And what's your kind of thoughts on Rocco Vata for the remainder of this season at Celtic?
Yeah, just to first touch on Rocco, I was really disappointed last year with Ange that we'd obviously had the League One. I think it was 5 or 6 games, just nothing really to play for, and he's picking guys that just we know what they can do at that level for Celtic. Wasn't really experimenting much. Albeit he played Bernabei and a few fringe players, but the likes of Vata, Summers, I would have liked to see them get more game time the last few games of last season. Coming into this season, obviously there was a lot of talk around Vata's future. I think there still is. He's only a year left on his deal. So yeah, I think Vata, I really want to see him kind of give him more minutes over the next few months. The injury of Vata could be a blessing in disguise really for his development at Celtic. I think he obviously hasn't really been given a chance on the Rodgers yet this season for whatever reason, which I was kind of surprised. I seen him kind of as a bit of a Mikey Johnson situation when Rodgers first came to the club. He really liked Mikey Johnson. He was giving him loads of chances and stuff, and Johnson really progressed from there. But I think Vata, he's never put a foot wrong when he's played for Celtic. And yeah, I'd really like to, even the start of this season, we've had Jamie Forrest on the bench, who great servant for Celtic. Some great memories of him playing for us. But I just think he's 30, 31 now. He's a nice squad player to have, especially for young players in the squad. But I think Vata should be at this stage maybe getting in over him in the matchday squad, because listen, Rocco Vata is really, really talented young player. There's no denying that, and I think if we can't play him in these games against the likes of, maybe not at the weekend, but in future games against the likes of Dundee, St. Johnstone, if we can't throw him in, then when can we kind of give him an opportunity? But yeah, in terms of who replaces Abada, I think what Brian was saying, I really agree with. I think Abada and Maida just don't play well together. They're not natural wingers. Obviously we know Maida's kind of technical difficulties. He's a bit technically limited, which is unfortunate, but we know what he can do off the ball. His pace, he can finish obviously at times. But I think I'd like to see Palma given a chance on Saturday. I think he's a bit as similar to Jota, a player we have at the moment. Haksabanovic has obviously gone on loan, and we've brought in Palma, who great goal record and scored for Honduras during the week in the international break. But yeah, I think throwing Yang in for the Champions League would probably be a bit ambitious. I think I really like Yang. I think he's probably been the shine and spark for Celtic's transfer window, to be honest. He's been really, really good anytime he's impressed. I get a bit of he's had some really Jota-esque quality moments. The assist up in Aberdeen, just a real bit of quality for that. To take us out of a hole where we were in a hole at Aberdeen. But yeah, I think Yang probably is the main kind of replacement option for Abada at the moment. Whether he starts in Rotterdam is a different question, but for me, I think Yang definitely on Saturday. I'd give him the full 90 minutes and continue kind of his hope and continue his really good form in the Celtic shirt so far.
I'd agree with that. And you know, the thing with taking on a player It's one of these ones where it's like, right, where does that appear on the data list? Where does that appear on the plan? Because if everybody sets up and they expect this kind of like game plan from the team, the one thing that can throw all that into disarray, Brian, is somebody just shows a moment of absolute magic, takes on a couple of players. Everything else is ripped up and thrown in the bin. And it's that individual magic that I think obviously Jota had in spades. And as we've been saying today, we've seen a bit of that. We've seen enough flashes from Yang to suggest that he's going to be bringing that kind of magic to the game. I would love to see him starting tomorrow and then, to have that a good game and for that to continue on Tuesday, because I'm also a great believer of the time is now with a lot of players. We're going into a game tomorrow against Dundee, and yeah, we do have one eye on the Feyenoord game. Therefore, I don't see us being too experimental, but that is the type of game over a season, over a calendar, where you would say that is where you've got to play somebody like Reo Hatate. Yesterday, I spoke yesterday. It's not going to happen tomorrow because of the Feyenoord game, but ordinarily. And I spoke yesterday about the fact that it's a type of game that you would probably give minutes to the likes of Kwon in the most forgotten signing of the season, Kwon. He's not going to get minutes tomorrow, Brian, because everything is kind of geared towards preparing us for Tuesday night. And it's a bit of a shame, but in terms of that, he needs to have minutes this season because, as I say, every time he's stepped up the challenge and the challenge is intensified, he stepped up to that on international level. And I think he needs to be challenged more. I take what James says as well in relation to Ange not giving him enough minutes. I think that it was key, and we spoke about it last season, that players like that get the minutes. Now, Jean-Paul II, Jean-Paul, nay Jim Orr. Well, unfortunately, JP, Jim Orr appears every fortnight because, he needs a fortnight to recover from the amount of positivity that he pours in to Acsom on a Friday, as he did last week. I loved last week, by the way, Brian. It was a right laugh. It was a great mix. The four of us I don't think five of us had ever been on the show together, and we were ripping each other to pieces, etc., which is fantastic. It's all about the crack, isn't it? Jean-Paul, you're still in. I watched Bernardo the other night for Portugal under-21, and he was brilliant. Luke's a player. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him. It's decorating half an hour for Rio tomorrow. We need him ready for Tuesday. There is also that, Brian. There's that in the back of your mind. We have had an injury crisis so far this season. Let's not get any more players injured. We've not seen Reo Hatate at all playing to the full kind of level that we would expect him to play at this season, because he didn't start the first game and then he got injured against Aberdeen and he's just coming back in. But it does lead us to that position. There's been a lot spoken about in the press. Is it the press or on the media, I would suggest, around the player who was kind of playing in that midfield role, injuring Todd Cantwell at Ibrox. I'm not convinced it was Odin Thiago Holm that injured him, Brian. Didn't he go in a wee bit hard himself on Maeda 5-10 minutes before that? Is that maybe where the injury problem started? It seems a bit harsh that the Rangers manager's coming out and more or less naming indirectly Holm as being to blame for injuring one of his players, and then obviously calling out the ref as well.
Yeah, but hearing the mooch talk too much and run his mouth is pretty standard these days, to be fair. And he just continues to embarrass himself in his club, so I actually don't really mind. Plus, as I said before, I think Holm is going to be an absolute baller for us, and if one of these things in the CV is taken out, I have to always stop myself swearing when I go to say his name. But taking out Cantwell, I don't think that's any huge bad thing, to be fair. But it's interesting when you talked about the midfield and some of the players there. So I actually think Kwon and Vata will feature tomorrow. The reason being, I think guys like Palmer and Bernardo, I think have been signed to play in Europe, but I don't think they'll start on Tuesday. But I think he wants some minutes in the legs at some point. I also think, so I've got a lineup in my head for Tuesday and a lineup in my head for tomorrow, and I think there'll be some positions switched. And I think tomorrow's a decent enough chance to give Con a run out. I think you just push McGregor up because you won't drop McGregor. And then you can maybe rest O'Reilly, who I think's a stick-on starter on Tuesday, and then probably play Hatate. And then what that allows us it gives Kwon it gives Rodgers, the option with Cohen that if we're really under pressure, say we take a lead in Rotterdam and it's 70 minutes, he may want to show that up. And Kwon, with his height, and he was brought in to do that role, you might want him in to come in. And I think if you just bring him out the blue, having no played at all this season really, and throw him into the Champions League game, I don't think that's great. But if you give him 90 minutes against Dundee and then maybe 15, if we're under a bit of pressure, I think you may see something like that. As often, I may be totally wrong.
Isn't he left out though? Is he not left out of the squad? I think Awata made it in front of him.
Oh, so he did. There's Awata. Sorry,
Yeah,
Awata. I thought it was Awata that was out. Well, in that case, you might say Awata then, for the same logic. I just think there's going to be a change up in that midfield tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Hatate will probably play tomorrow with a view of coming on as a sub, but I don't think he starts in Rotterdam either. And I know people are saying he brings a lot of balance to the midfield and he's our best midfielder, but he's not shown it so far this season. He's not really shown he's 100, because he's going to play as a 10 in Rodgers' system by the looks of it. And he's not shown he's going to have the absolute discipline to play there. However, the flip of that is, I always think you want some sort of maverick in your team.
Yeah.
Miravchik-esque quality he brings, where you don't really know what he's going to do. He's kind of unpredictable. So it'll be interesting to see. I think he plays tomorrow, but I don't think he starts Tuesday.
Well, that is interesting. I get your logic with Awata. You know, as I've said before, I'm a fan. There's loads to like about Awata. I don't think he's a right back or a centre half, but I like him as that midfielder who can show it up, like you say. He's a physical player, even despite he's got a bit of lack of height. He's still quite a physical player. I like that about him. He is in the squad. I'm going to say though, James, that in my mind, and I know that some of the data analysts will disagree with us because they'll say that he's not good enough in terms of his defensive duties. In my mind, Hatate is our best midfield player. Now, I think so far this season, O'Reilly has performed better than anybody in that position. But overall, I do think that Hatate is that game changer that Brian speaks about. He's got a maverick quality in that he can play a pass no one else on the park can play. He can open up a defence in a way that nobody else is able to do it. Yeah, he might not have the defensive qualities of Home, who is clearly defensively sound as a player, as a midfielder. And Rodgers might look at that for the Champions League and think, I need something more of a safe bet. I can't be as open as playing Hatate in the midfield if he's not going to track back. He's not going to give me that protection. So I totally get it. But maybe I'm just a typical football fan who wants to see my favourite players who I enjoy watching. I would have Hatate in for no other reason than I think that he can do things in a game no one else in our team can do. And that includes O'Reilly. For all the plaudits that he's getting and deserving the so. Hatate, O'Reilly and Callum McGregor is my strongest midfield. And in preparation of Tuesday, I'd play them tomorrow. What's your take on it, James?
I think Hatate is a must start in the Celtic team. It's obviously just a bit of a different situation. O'Reilly and Hatate are both playing different positions than they did under Ange last year.
Yeah.
Like under Ange last year, O'Reilly and Hatate were kind of given free license to really get further up the pitch, and their defensive responsibilities weren't as strong as maybe Rodgers would like them to be this season. But yeah, even if you look at our Champions League performances last year, if you look at where we struggled, it was defensive midfield, goalkeeper, left back. All three haven't been strengthened, which is a different conversation. But I think midfield is just going to be the key battle really in the Champions League. McGregor obviously has been playing from the 6 row so far this season. Not in the best of form. Was brilliant against Rangers, of course, but I think O'Reilly being rested for the weekend is a really good idea, because the injury crisis we have at the moment, we do not need Matt O'Reilly getting injured on Saturday and missing Rotterdam next week. I think Awata is a bit of a. I would have liked to see him given more game time. I think he's a good option to have at defensive midfield, and I think it's a bit strange that he hasn't been given opportunities this season, especially considering McGregor's form and kind of our lack of options at that number 6 role. Quan was obviously brought in. I think he's still a bit raw. I'd like to see him on Saturday against Dundee. Whether that happens, that is a different question. But Reo Hatate, I think he just, especially we're going to be coming under a lot of pressure next week in Rotterdam, and his ability to play out from the press, his technical ability, his long range passing, short range passing, it's all just top notch. You need them types of creative players, especially in Europe when we're not going to be creating a ridiculous amount of chances. You need guys that are going to be consistently kind of playing them balls in behind the defence and creating chances for us. So yeah, my midfield for Tuesday probably McGregor, O'Reilly, Hatate, but I think Rodgers will obviously change. He's changing their roles, O'Reilly and Hatate in particular, how they're going to play in midfield. But I think if they're as open, our midfield is as open as last year, I'd be really, really worried.
Yeah, that is a concern, which is why I think it was a good point Brian made about bringing in that holding midfield player. Bit of a, a shock if he does do it, to be honest with you, a bit of a wild card. But if he does, I can understand the thinking behind it. We're talking a wee bit about maverick players that are able to change a game, kind of old school. And I remember talking to one such player in Paddy McCourt, and Paddy was talking about, this was before Stevie Kenny got the job. He was the under-21 manager. And I says to Paddy about the fact that in terms of Scottish football and what Stevie Kenny did in Scotland, he wasn't highly rated because he went to Dunfermline. There was a bit of a player revolt. I think the experienced players didn't really take to his methods too kindly. And player power, if you like, the manager gets sacked, as always happens. He goes back to lick his wounds and build his reputation back up in Ireland. So it was at Derry City that Paddy McCourt played under Stephen Kenny, and he said that he was the best manager he had ever worked under, bar none. And if he was to become the Ireland manager, he would be sensational and all this kind of stuff. This was before he got the top job. He was under 21 manager at the time. But I do remember him saying that. And Paddy obviously is the biggest maverick of them all when you think about Celtic cult icons. Talking of icons, an icon of the screen, I never mentioned this actually, John Kearney, very, very sadly passed away earlier on this month at the age of 83. Now, if anyone doesn't know who John Kearney is, if you've ever wondered why Jim Craig has the nickname Kearney, then it is due to this man. Look it up, have a wee look on the Internet Movie Database, see if you can find a role of John Kearney's that might link him in to that man Craig. Jim Craig is called Kearney as a result of this man. And I had the absolute pleasure in meeting John Kearney a couple of times. He came along to a couple of launches, an art exhibition. He was an artist himself. He was also a writer. His Celtic books are phenomenal. Seek them out. He very sadly passed away. And he told me a wee story about the fact that when he was at the absolute height of his powers as an actor, and by the way, he was proper, like, he loved the theatre work and all that kind of stuff, Brian. I know you're into the acting, you've got a bit of experience yourself, proper thespian actor and all that, right? He was offered the role of a certain James Bond, and he knocked it back. And he had no regrets. He just said, you know what? That's no real acting. That's cartoon stuff, and he didn't do it. So that was the big story about John Kearney. Massive Celtic fan as well. Read his Celtic books. The one on Jimmy McGrory is something else. Sevenpenny Gate as well. I think it is Sixpenny Gate. I need to check. Is another one that he wrote during his lifetime. Check them all out. Thoughts with his friends and family as well. Feed the Bear, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Hail, hail. It's always brilliant to see you in the comments section. And Stuart Ramsey, afternoon Acsom, and all my fellow Tims. It's Friday. I might have a beer tonight. Brian, are you going to indulge in a little tipple this evening?
It's been known, Paul. I'm not going to lie to you. It's
you normally have a wee glass of red with Martin O'Neill, schmoozing with the ex-gaffer.
Schmoozing with the ex-gaffer, yes. So that's pretty good. But it'll be probably whiskey tonight. Probably a few whiskies tonight. Although I'm getting my house renovated, so it's a bit of a bomb scare. So we'll see how that ends up.
You might need a dram to get you through that. Sean Anderson met JP at the Celtic Kilmarnock game. Absolute gentleman. Got a picture with him. Just a pity about the scoreline. Yeah, JP travels. He's going to be in Rotterdam actually on Tuesday as well. Travels all over the place watching Celtic. Kookaburra, do we need Hatate to beat Dundee? Good question. If he starts and gets injured, our Champions League campaign is in the mud. Better to give him 20 minutes from the bench. So he'll be fresh for Feyenoord, which is only 3 days away. You know this, right? Even though I'm saying play Hatate, if someone was deserving of that jersey based on performances, I would say it was probably Odin Thiago Holm. And again, going back to a point you made, James, if you're going to play a player, why not give him it? I know that he started against Kilmarnock. That was a bad day at the office for the whole team. But Holm has really impressed me. 20 years of age, he's got that nature about him where he loves the rough and tumble, which I think in the domestic game you're going to need as a Celtic player. Can you see Rodgers maybe throwing him in?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with Holm now since he's came in. I think even looking before he signed, just looking at his, obviously doing a background check on who he was. Obviously nominated for European Golden Boy. He's been playing first team football in Norway since he was 16, 17 years of age, which is remarkable, really. It's exactly the type of player Celtic should be going for, and I'm not really surprised at the start he's made. He just seems to have really kind of impressed so far for me anyway. His technical ability, really aggressive in the tackle, something obviously I think Hatate needs to add to his game. Holm kind of already has that in his game. Technically, he's quick over a couple of yards. He's a lot of really promising attributes to play in the centre of the park, and I definitely wouldn't be against him starting Saturday or even on Tuesday. I think technically he'll be able to deal with that pressure that final will put us under. Maybe I think David Turnbull obviously is technically a brilliant player, but he's just a bit slow on the ball sometimes, just the way he is. He turns maybe a bit slower, and I think he'll add that pace into the game that we'll need to get a result at final, because I'm guessing Rodgers will kind of attempt to play on the counter a bit. In final, obviously similar to how we done at Ibrox, we kind of were trying to catch them on the counter attack, particularly in the second half. But I think Holm will speed up our play, and I think even against Ibrox, he made a really good pass for a counter attack. I think in the second half, maybe it was Yang. I think just kind of breaking through their defense. He will feature, I'd say, next Tuesday. Whether if it's from the bench or starting is a different question, but I definitely wouldn't be against him starting tomorrow or Tuesday.
Yeah, he's a player that James McKenzie was talking about quite a bit when he signed. He really rated him and thought he was going to be a superstar. And I'll tell you something, from what I've seen so far, I wouldn't doubt that, not from what I've seen for sure. And I think that also with regards to Holm, he came in for a wee bit of stick, didn't he, because of his social media usage, Brian. It can get you into a bit of deep water from time to time. Haksabanovic could probably tell us all about that as well. Haksabanovic is a strange one. He's away. And I was talking to BBC Stoke last week about Haksabanovic. And, I was talking about what was positive about his play. Obviously, I wasn't going to just, talk for half an hour about how rotten he was. Obviously, I was looking at all the attributes that he might be able to bring to the game and that kind of thing. But I think he was a bit of a maverick. And, sometimes in the modern game, there's no room for it, Brian. There's no room for being a maverick, is there? You've got to be someone who's playing a very specific role. And if that role involves you defensively, and I think a big part of Haksabanovic's problem was he was probably expected to do quite a bit of defensive work. That's never going to be his game. You then look at Maeda, who technically probably is nowhere near as good, but he's always going to be a far more valuable player to you because of the attributes, his application, for example, the work off the ball, the playing a role, doing something that the manager wants you to do, and being part of a game plan. Haksabanovic and the aforementioned Paddy McCourt, these guys, as good as they might be technically and naturally, probably don't fit into the modern game, do they?
Well, listen, I won't have a word said against Paddy McCourt. I absolutely loved Paddy. What a player, the Derry Pelly. But you know what it reminds me of? I was sort of listening and thinking about Hatate and Haksabanovic and inside the Mavericks. It reminds me of when Gravison was at Celtic under Strachan. And Strachan wanted everybody to play very, very specific roles, and everybody had to do their tactic to the T. And Gravison was just all over the gaff, just doing what he wanted, but he kind of nice quality as a player. So I do think that there can be room for that. It just depends on the manager. I think, Rodgers prefers that in more attacking areas, a bit of flair, but that there has to be a very disciplined approach to it. And I actually think Haksabanovic, if he hadn't maybe been complaining and opening his mouth and stuff, he might have had a future, he might have stayed. Maybe I think he'd have been good as a 10. I've said that a few times. I think, when you look at, this is why I think Hatate will start tomorrow. And I think Haksabanovic might have been good, is if you're looking against a team like Dundee United who's going to just sit in and pack in, you need these guys to just do that or something a bit different that you can't really account for. That maybe we didn't see in the first few days. And then when you mentioned home, I said during pre-season he caught the eye. I think he looks an absolute baller. He's a real good player, a real good signing. And I think he's a stick on to start on Tuesday. I think him, O'Reilly and McGregor start on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, I think tomorrow, I would put Iwata in and let McGregor go forward with Hatate. But I suspect what he'll probably do is have home McGregor and Hatate and rest O'Reilly for Tuesday. I get the point about Hatate in Europe, and I think he will be really valuable. But just my concern is he's not quite up to speed. He's not in great form. He's not played a lot of games. I think to go to Rotterdam and expect him to win the game for you when we're going to be up against it, especially away from home, I think you need a bit more security in the middle of the park.
Yeah, totally get it. Tony Cassidy, there's a wee bit of interference coming in from Ireland, Tony. Just a tiny little bit of static. So what we're doing with James is obviously bringing him in and then muting him which stops him from disagreeing and arguing with Brian as well. But it's just a tiny wee bit of static. So apologies for anybody who's wearing earphones and that's maybe bugging you. Danielle, great to see you as always. We need a complete performance tomorrow. I totally agree with this. I don't think we've had a complete performance this season. Haven't seen that this season, and the win isn't as incredible as it was at Mordor. Papers over a few cracks. Right, absolutely. Right. No, I totally get it. And it would be great to go out there and see a free-flowing team winning by 4 or 5 goals. We've not seen it this season. It would set us up nicely for Feyenoord. And I do agree with that, absolutely. Now, the underwater cabbage salesman, how's the sales going? I'll not tell you what happened to my dinner last night. Brian knows about that. Iwata hasn't shown much yet. Still a question mark against him. I think the problem with Iwata is the fact that he's been chopped and changed, moved about the place. And I know that Liam says that from grassroots in Japan, they train players at that level. You don't have one position on the park. You've got to be a team player. You've got to be able to fill in here, there, and everywhere. I found it was interesting that the Champions League squad on the UEFA website had Hatate as a defender. Yes, he probably has played more games at left back than Liam Scales in his career, but he's never a left back, is he? But he can play there. Iwata obviously has been deployed at right back, centre half, centre mid. So yeah, I think that's maybe why there's a bit of question mark about him. We've not really seen him play in the 5 or 6 games in a row, and he's, for me, his strongest position, which is as a holding midfielder. Will they get that opportunity? Well, he's in the squad for the Champions League. And we have Paul Andrew Martin. Hatate is our best player, period. I totally get that. You know, just as a football fan watching a game of football, not over-analysing all the data, I totally get that. The eye test, the things he can do with the ball, the moments of magic, absolutely agree with it. But if there's a game plan and that game plan involves all your players having to have defensive qualities, tracking back qualities, that's where it falls down, doesn't it? Michael says, where does Bernardo come into this? I'm not quite sure yet, because I think there's players ahead of him in the pecking order, and some of whom I've actually spoken about already in Home and Turnbull, Hatate. So we'll need to wait and see when he's introduced what he can bring to the party as well. And Marquis, I'm honestly still not sold on Hatate. It shows you the two ends of the scale, Brian, doesn't it? His first touch and fight can be abysmal at times. Right. I'm pretty sure an hour before kick-off tomorrow, we will find out what Brendan Rodgers thinks. There's a jersey behind me, and I'm going to swap these around because they're coming in thick and fast. I've got another one this morning, and we're going to be talking about the jerseys very briefly because it is for a good cause. We are running a Sell the Jerseys initiative whereby we are getting Celtic fans to send us jerseys of all shapes and sizes and descriptions, some replica like this one, some signed, some match-worn, some even framed. We're going to be auctioning them off, raffling them off, raising money for wee Jamie Tierney, who needs treatment for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. 60 grand a year it costs. We're going to raise as much as we possibly can and give it to wee Jamie's family to pay towards their treatment. This jersey here, I'm going to ask you first, James, what does this remind you of? Or who does it remind you of?
I'd probably say prime Chris Commons, to be honest. I think the Ronnie Dyle era is what it reminds me of probably the most. Yeah, Chris Commons is kind of taking the punditry route now. Kind of, he's bashing Celtic a lot on Sky Sports over the last year. So I don't know what I think from now, but it's definitely a great player back in his day under Neil and Ronnie.
He was, and by the way, as soon as I see that jersey, that's exactly who I think about. I think about Chris Commons. I know that he was at the Masters team with Simon Donnelly, Mark Burchell, Joe Ledley, and a few others just the other week. They were playing on a blue carpet, but they still won the game. And I think of Chris Commons when I see this jersey. It was obviously a remake of the Umbro Classic from the early 80s, Brian, probably before your time, mate, early 80s. But New Balance did that well. They would take a classic design, they would kind of reimagine it and bring it back. And they knew that the fans already loved it from back in the day, a wee bit of nostalgia. But I look at this top and I would love to see something similar, right, in yellow, canary yellow with a green pinstripe. Wouldn't that be a cracking away jersey, Brian?
Yeah, I think we always have nice sort of kits over the years, and it kind of annoys me at times. My favourite ever kit was, remember it always reminds me of Henrik Larsson. It was the black with the gold piping. Right, it was an absolute belter. We've never done one quite as good. Same with the Bumblebee, we never got it quite right the second time. And you just think, just re-release it and put a different stripe or something. Just bring the same one back out, because everybody loved it, and it was a very much a cult classic. Yeah, the yellow one's always nice. I'll be honest, I love the third kit this season, the camouflage one.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem is it looks absolutely nothing like a Celtic top, but it's just a cool top. But I really like the camouflage one. And then, as I think we had a conversation before, young James, you're wearing the fourth kit for last season, and I think that was the best kit of last season. And I think the fourth kit, the anniversary one this season, is an absolute belter. It's my big 4-0 next month, big 40th, and I'm dropping as many hints as possible to the missus to get it for me. So she better.
It is a classic. It's a classic. It's a shame that we won't be wearing it, and we won't be wearing the one that James is sporting there, or we never wore it last season, which was shocking. But yeah, the reason we're talking about jerseys is we, Jamie Tierney, we're helping him with his fight against a horrible, horrible disorder, a horrible disease which targets the muscles. And a boy his age, he's only 4. It's horrendous. So more details underneath this video. What can you do to help? Well, what you can do is you can send us your old jerseys. I know these things are pretty expensive these days, and they can get a lot of money on eBay or various other places. But we'll certainly get them signed. We'll get them signed by ex-players. One of the occasions that we're going to be using to get some ex-players to sign them is the St. Roch's centenary game. Now, we have had a relationship with St. Roch's over the last few years. Stevie Mullen was a much-loved contributor on Acsom for a long, long time, especially in the early days of the live stream. And we are going to be helping their centenary celebration. So there's a centenary game up at James McGrory Park. It's the 15th of October. The season ticket holders have got up until Saturday exclusively to buy their tickets for the game. I think it's looking like an 800 capacity at the stadium. It will sell out. Public sale Sunday up at James McGrory Park. Where does Acsom come into it? I hear you ask. Well, we're actually pulling together a team of ex-Celts. Now, can you imagine, right, as a wee lad, if somebody was to say to me, you would need to pull together a team of ex-Celtic players to play in a football game. It's like all your birthdays and Christmases coming at once. So I've been out there asking a lot of the ex-players, and it's quite difficult because of a number of factors. Firstly, loads of ex-players don't live in Scotland, right? Especially in the kind of near past. Most of them have gone back to wherever they originated from or were brought up, and we've got a lot of overseas players in the modern game. So there is that. There's also the fact that the centenary year, I think of these guys, the centenary heroes, still as young men. Granty and McAvenny and Morris all wearing the kind of peroxide tints in their hair and all this, and Derek White and all that. That was 35 years ago. And they were probably 26, 27 at the time. So a lot of them aren't getting any younger. So we do have at the moment the crux of a fantastic Celtic side. I'm not going to let the cat out the bag yet, but keep an eye on the socials because we're going to start announcing the players in the next couple of weeks. We've got some fantastic players who are going to be wearing the green and white hoops for Celtic select team against a St. Roch's select. We'll also be hearing from the one and only Stevie Mullen, who's going to be joining me in a couple of weeks for a wander round paradise. And I know a lot of people in the comments section will be delighted to see Stevie, because he was a bit of a fan's favourite on the Acsom stream. So yeah, we're going to be hearing from Stevie as well. If you want a ticket for the St Roch Centenary game, get yourself up to James McGrory Park as of Sunday. Public sale opens. They're expecting it to sell out, 800 strong. A great occasion for a great football club up at the Garn Gad. And by the way, it's been long delayed due to the pandemic. It's been an absolute pleasure today to see so many of you tuning in. Thank you very much for supporting everything that we do, everything that Acsom does. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. We'll be back again tomorrow, 30 minutes before kickoff, and all those questions we've been asking about team selections will be answered, and we can debate them a wee bit further. All that's left for me to say thank you once again to Brian Degnan and also to James French for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.